very excited to come and talk about humor in the workplace.
That's interesting.
Great. So we can start with this interview. So Drew, which are the benefits, or what are the benefits on having humor at work? Sorry.
It's a great question. I'll also mention, maybe people already have figured this out, but there is a live transcript going on right now. So you can turn that on if you're like, I can read English, but it's harder for me to hear it. There is a live transcript in English that you can check out. So that may also help as you're taking a look at things. But to answer your question, which I think is an important one, I'm going to actually start with the question for you, and maybe you can translate this into Spanish, because I think it's an important question for people to answer, and important enough that I'd love for people to answer this in the chat as well. And the question is, would you rather do something that is fun or not fun? So you can share in the chat, or maybe we can get a translation of that question. The question is, would you rather do something that is fun or not fun?
So everybody's reading whatever we said. You can write in the chat in Spanish. It's no problem. We can translate. Maria Paula can translate, of course.
I'm trying to write in Spanish as I'm trying to listen in English.
That's very hard. That's very.
It's going to be a hard day today.
It's impressive. So yeah, les gustaría hacer algo divertido o algo no es divertido is the question. So go ahead and share in the chat, divertido or no divertido. Which one is better, right? So Veronica says something that is fun. Obviously, Paula says something that is fun, right? So absolutely. When we work with people, 99.9% of people will say fun, right? As long as, it's not something that's going to cost too much money or something that is illegal, people would rather do something that is fun over not fun. So it then stands to reason, if you were to make, say, your emails a little bit more fun, do you think people would be more likely to respond to them? Or if you were to make your meetings a little bit more fun, do you think people would be more likely to attend? Or if you were to make your own work a little bit more fun, do you think you would be engaged in it more? Would you be a little bit more productive? Would you be willing to work on things a little bit harder or a little bit longer? And the research shows us that the answer is yes. There are over 30 benefits to using humor in the workplace, ranging from it increases productivity, it reduces stress, it boosts your immune system, it burns calories, it increases perceived leadership skills. And in fact, in one study, they found that people who used humor more, as long as it was effective in the workplace, they were also paid more as well. So to answer your initial question, there are a lot of benefits to using humor in the workplace when it's used well.
One thing that I would like to add, first of all, obviously, I'm not using well the humor at work because I'm not getting paid more. That's for sure. That's one point. The second point, what about the concern on many people not being taken seriously if they use humor or if they are fun?
Yeah, it's a common concern, and I think if you were to only use humor, maybe, right? Because humor doesn't replace the work, right? If you need to do a project and then someone asks you how that project is going, and then you make a joke, and they're like, no, seriously, how's that project going? You can't just be like, okay, see you later. I said the joke, that's all I'm going to do. Like, no, you still have to do your work. And as long as you are doing your work, and when you use humor to serve a specific purpose, so we can talk about that certainly in more detail, but it's not humor just for the sake of using humor. It's not just trying to be funny. It's more about effectively using humor. That's when you don't really have those concerns about people will take me seriously or not. But this question around seriousness, I think, is valuable to explore, because we were doing some work with a gentleman from the Red Cross, actually an Argentinian from the Red Cross, a guy named Pablo. He was the first one who introduced me to the concept of porteñol, right? So we have Spanglish. I didn't realize there was also Portuñol, but he was like, so he taught me about that. But in it, he wanted to learn how to use humor in teaching people about what to do in case of a flood or what to do if there's a drought, basically disaster preparedness at the Red Cross. And the way that he said it was, and if what you are communicating is important, or if the work that you are doing is important, then boredom has very serious consequences. And so if what you are doing is important, then you would want to use any tool that you have at your disposal. So in some ways, if you're serious about your work, you would use whatever tools you can that would be effective with people. And we know that humor in particular is effective, because when you get people laughing or when you get them smiling, that's when they're listening. If you are entertaining, that's when they're engaged. And so it's about effectively using humor. But if you are serious about your work, it's kind of important that you know how to use humor to help support that work.
What about you just mentioned, Drew, that it's not about saying jokes or making people laugh. What is about humor at work? I mean, I'm not sure I want to be a comedian at work, even though maybe I am. But it is not my intention, actually. But what is the difference on? I mean, it's not about laughing. Yes. So how do I know I'm using humor at work?
Yeah. So the way that we think about it is that it's less about trying to be funny and more about making things a little bit more fun. And so a joke could be part of it. If you are a good joke teller, if you like jokes, then yeah, you could maybe incorporate appropriate ones. You know, when I was a project manager at Procter & Gamble, I would include jokes at the ends of my status reports. So, you know, I'd have a weekly status report that I would send out. It'd be a really long document. So then at the bottom, I'd put like a PS and then some type of joke. So that was just a fun, playful way for me to include puns, because I love wordplay. So that could be part of it, but it could also be just doing things a little bit differently. Like another thing that I will do is when I get bored reading emails, I'll start to read those emails in an accent in my head. You know, I'll be like, okay, what if this person was the Incredible Hulk, right? I'm a huge Marvel Cinematic Universe nerd. And so I'm like, okay, if this was an Incredible Hulk who sent this to me, or Arnold Schwarzenegger, or Winnie the Pooh, or whoever, whatever character there is in my mind, I'll read an email as if it was from that person. And so to answer your question of like, how do I know if I'm using humor at work? It's, are you finding ways to make your own work a little bit more fun? That's kind of the starting point. We can certainly talk about specific strategies or how you can tap into your own sense of humor, but that's kind of the starting point, is you're just making things a little bit more fun. 1%, 5%, 10% more fun is already going to have a big impact on the way that you show up.
So humor is a skill, or it's something that I have to bring on my back? It's something that I can learn to use
natural
humor
born,
or natural born humorist.
I mean, I think there are some people who are quote unquote naturally funny, but for the most part, it's something that can be learned. Like, you know, as I talk about in the TEDx talk that you saw, that has more than 10 million views on it now at this point. I've done stand-up and improv over 1,000 times. I've done over 1,000 stand-up and improv shows. I have spoken or performed in 30 countries on 6 continents. Virtually, we've touched upon and we've done workshops for more than 100 countries as well, more than 250 organizations. And when people who I grew up with found out that I did comedy, they were like, but you're not funny. Like, I wasn't that person that grew up funny. I was never the person that no one has ever said to me, you should do stand-up comedy. That's how funny you are. No, it was, for me, I got pushed into improv and stand-up later. And I discovered, just like communication is a skill, or public speaking is a skill, or leadership is something that you can learn and improve, humor is a similar thing that you can build. And so that has an interesting correlation or consequence. That means that the question isn't, are you funny? The question is, what kind of funny are you, or what kind of funny do you want to be? And what we've discovered is that there's roughly 7 personas that people typically adopt when it comes to humor. And if you start to understand what those personas are or which one is most natural to you, that's how it becomes a little bit easier to unlock your sense of humor for the workplace.
That's interesting. Maybe we can share at least mention these 7 personas that you're speaking about. But before going into that direction, that will put us into how to become or how to implement humor at work. I have 2 questions. One is a little bit more personal, so if you want to share with us, that's good. If you're not, share it anyway. No, the idea is you were born a little bit more into engineering, and engineering and sense of humor, usually they don't go together well. I can tell you that as an engineer. So what happened to you? How you become this?
What happened? It's a great question. So you are right. I come from the world of engineering. So this on my wall is a degree in computer science and engineering from The Ohio State University in the United States. And yeah, I was not funny growing up, although engineers can make good comedians. They're very observational. There is a logic to comedy, which I think helps engineers. There can be when we think about intentionally using humor, it can help. But for me, what happened was at university, when I was going to school, my best friend wanted to start an improv comedy group. He needed people and forced me to join. And admittedly, I was terrible, right? I was not very good, but I did fall in love with the work. It was a lot of fun. And people tell me often, they're like, oh, I could never do improv. But the reality is that you improvise every single day, right? You don't know what conversations are going to happen. You didn't know that you're going to have to answer this silly question of, would you rather do something that is fun or not fun? But you were still able to do it. You're still able to adapt. And improvisation as an art form just adds a couple of more rules to it. But with that practice and repetition, I got better. It helped me as an introvert, someone who is more reserved, more kind of to myself. It helped me get comfortable talking with people. It helped me to better adapt. And that led me to, after a year of doing improv, a few of us in the improv group were like, okay, if we make things up and are funny, maybe it's easier if we write them down and then say them later, which is stand-up comedy, right? You write ideas down and then you share them later. Turns out that it's way harder. I think stand-up comedy is way harder than improv comedy, but they're both a lot of fun. I enjoyed that as well. And so I continue to do it again and again and again. And I was very, very bad for a long time. And there's still some people who are like, they don't like my nerdy sense of humor because I talk about math and puns and communication. And my material is always like, I always want my mom to be proud of what I say. So I don't talk about, sex, drugs, or rock and roll. Like it's always very clean, appropriate humor. And so to some people, maybe I'm still not funny, but it was the practice and repetition that helped me to get there. Just like any skill requires practice and repetition, this also required practice and repetition.
Understand. I also wanted my mom to be proud, but I failed actually. So I can say whatever. The good part is I can say whatever I want. Anyway, she's not proud of me. So let's now we understand where you're coming from. You came to lead some kind of team during your engineering life. What about the leaders that they don't want to implement or to show that they can be fun? They can be funny or whatever, because a little bit of sense of, okay, if I'm leading here, I have to be again serious. If I'm not, I can be seen as weak. What's your recommendation to that kind of leaders?
Well, I mean, I guess my question to those leaders would be, do you want to be perceived as strong or do you want to be effective? Because those aren't necessarily the same thing. You can be a super stoic looking, this person is serious and they must be serious about their job type person. and not be effective at all in your work. And if you think about, especially in today's age, when we live in a quote unquote knowledge economy, we know that people's emotions impact their ability to get work done, right? If you are stressed out because of the uncertainty of the pandemic or because of challenges at your job, you know you're not going to be as effective as you could be. If you're burned out, if you're worn out, if you are just kind of at the wit's end, you know that you can't be productive or as productive as you could be. So as a leader, probably important to recognize that emotions impact ability. And we want to try to find how can we tap into things like positive emotions. So like humor, like imagine you're in a meeting and people are starting to kind of get conflicted. They're starting to butt heads a little bit. There's a lot of tension in the room. Well, imagine if you could diffuse that tension with an observation or a joke, get people to laugh, reset the energy of the room. How much more productive would that meeting be? Or if you have to communicate something that's really important, imagine if you could kind of get people to laugh at the beginning of it and you knew that they were actually listening or paying attention rather than having their cameras off and being in a different room, not even on the Zoom meeting, or they're in present, like, but they're paying attention, not on their phones, et cetera, right? These are the things that humor can do. And this is where, again, it's not about using humor so that you're like, I'm so funny and people love me because I'm funny. It's more of how do I use humor to achieve this specific result, to get this goal that I want to achieve of something that a leader can really, really think about. And so I think that's where I would challenge leaders is to say, do you want something that's going to make your people more productive, less stressed and happier? Do you want something that also doesn't really cost that much money to do? Or are you okay? You're like, no, I want to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on something that's not going to work. It's like, no. It's like, okay, well then humor can be one of those things. And obviously the how becomes very important, but you're right. It is really important to get people with a mindset to say, okay, this isn't a nice to have. It is a must have, right? In the way that we work today, it is a must have.
I'm really willing to hear the logic on comedy.
Yeah, the logic.
You said it's a logic on comedy, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. So in some ways, because I'm an engineer, you can kind of think of comedy is math plus words, right? There's a logic to it. If I put this thing together plus this thing, it can equal this. So the way that the logic comes into play, there's this great kind of framework as a way to generate comedy, which says, if this is true, what else is true? And so maybe the best way to kind of to share this is an example. So Pal, what's something that you are passionate about?
Movies.
Movies, great. Is there a particular movie that you love or really enjoy?
No, cinema. The whole thing.
I love the whole thing. All right, that's fantastic. So the idea within comedy, even just a small observation like that, the logic can say, okay, if it is true that I love all types of cinema, well, comedically, what else could be true? Well, that could mean that, one, you neglect other people in your life just because you're watching movies, right? There's always so many great movies. And so it's like, listen, I get distracted by movies all the time. To the point that I forgot about my daughter, right? Because I was watching this particular movie. Or you might say, I love movies so much that I'm one of those people who get distracted. This is true for me. Like whenever I'm on an airplane, I get distracted by all of the different screens of people watching movies. And I watch all of the movies vicariously through them, right? And do you do that? You're like, I'm checking in on that. I can't hear what's going on, but there's a plot point there. Okay. And then this is happening in this cartoon over on this one and this person. Hey, can you scoot back a little bit? I'm trying to like watch it, like, right? So you say, if this is true, what else is true? It starts with this one observation and you build it into something else. And that's kind of this logic to it. There's also very specific forms that you can follow. So for example, there is a structure of a joke called a comic triple. And a comic triple is a list of 3 things where the third thing is unexpected. So for example, I could say that, as an engineer, I used to like to take things apart and put them back together again. Things like clocks and radios and my parents' marriage, which I never got that back, right? And so that's a comic triple. The first two things in that list are common, clocks and radios. The third thing is something unexpected. So then we can apply this logical structure to almost anything, right? A comic triple is nice. It's an easy way to incorporate some humor, because anytime you have a list, you can say, can I add something unexpected to the end of it? So like when I talk about even something like my client list. So if you're talking about the people that you've worked with as a group, well, I say, oh, I've worked with, with Microsoft, the United Nations, and the International Association of Canine Professionals. And canine professionals, you're like, wait, what is that? Is that an association for dogs who have jobs? What exactly is a canine professional, right? And so it's something unexpected. You get people to lean in a little bit more. So that's kind of what I mean by the logic of it. There's certain things. Now, the delivery, the performance, there's still some stuff out there that's, not just the logic, but the delivery of it. But that can get you started in thinking about these ideas. So if this is true, what else is true? Is a great way to start generating humor ideas based on the things that happen to you.
And what if it doesn't work?
Yeah, that was exactly my question.
Should I have a laugher or like a ha ha ha? I'm so funny.
Or this time, laugh.
Exactly. Please laughter, please. Yeah. So there's a couple of things you can do. Well, one, from improvisation and stand-up comedy, what I have learned is that failure is just data, right? If you do something that doesn't work, that's just data to say that didn't work that particular time. It doesn't mean that you're not funny ever. It's not commentary on your worth as a person. It doesn't mean that you yourself are a failure, right? And this is the broader context of it. It's not just applying to humor, but applying to life. It's like, no, it's just data. You can learn from it. And so if it doesn't work, then you can do a couple of things. One, if humor that you try to use is positive and inclusive and no one laughs, then it just becomes a positive, inclusive statement. Right? A lot of times it's only awkward if you make it awkward. So if I say, my client list is Microsoft, the United Nations, and the International Association of Canine Professionals. Right? You see what I did? Anyone? Like, yeah, that might be awkward. But if no one laughs and I just move past it, most people won't even know that I was attempting a joke. They'll just be like, oh, that's interesting. Right? So as long as I don't make it awkward, it doesn't typically tend to be awkward. And then the other thing is that you can learn and grow. So humor, much like engineering and computer science particularly, is an iterative process. It is something that evolves over time. Hey, I'm going to try it this way. Does it work? No, what if I change the last word? Does that make it a little bit better or stronger? So as you share it, you can test it out. And this is the advantage of some of the one-on-one work that we do, or finding an open mic, or even sharing it with your friends or coworkers. You can be like, hey, Leon, I have a joke that I want to try to work into a meeting a little bit later. What do you think of this? And then he can say, hey, that's funny, I like it, or that's terrible, don't say that, or whatever, right? You can find a safe space to practice this humor so that the first time you say it, it's not necessarily the first time the first time you say it in an important context, it's not that it's the first time you're saying it. For example, the TEDx talk that I did multiple stand-up shows and speeches prior to that talk so that I would know where people would laugh, so that I could refine which jokes worked and didn't work. And every audience is different, but you start to pick up on patterns. And so it's a practice and repetition thing.
What about some jokes in this particular era that we are living in, that you have to be very correct? You can make somebody feel bad or say something out of place. What about that? How can you still use humor? Because I find a little bit more difficult to use humor nowadays, taking into account that, okay, if I say this and somebody feels like, oh, I didn't feel good with that.
Mhm.
That might be a huge issue, especially in some of the companies, like all of them.
It is certainly a concern, right? This is all the effective humor that we talk about is very much with the caveat that you're using appropriate humor in the workplace, right? And so what does that actually mean? Well, there's a couple of things. One, when people tell me that they decided not to use any humor whatsoever because we live in a quote unquote cancel culture, or that people are too politically correct, etc. What that means to me is either they aren't good enough at using humor to adapt to different audiences and to a changing style, right? So it's maybe a skill set thing that they just haven't learned how to do that, or they're too lazy to try, or that they're so kind of prejudiced or so set in their previous ways that they're not willing to adapt, right? And so for most people it is, no, I'm just worried about it, so I don't know how to do it well. Great. Well, don't let that prevent you. Like, you didn't know how to drive a car when you first started learning how to drive a car, but that didn't prevent you from, you're like, I'm just going to walk everywhere because I don't know how to. It's like, no, you're like, okay, let me learn how to do it. So what does it mean to use appropriate humor? I think there's a couple of things that can be helpful. One is humor tends to be inappropriate for one of three reasons. It tends to be inappropriate either because it has an inappropriate topic. So, using humor in the workplace is not an excuse to then talk about something sexual, or, something drug related, or, politics sometimes, or etc. Right? So humor doesn't excuse kind of the subject matter that you're going to talk about. So the topic could be inappropriate. So you want to make sure it's still appropriate for the workplace. It could have an inappropriate target. So some forms of humor are just positive, inclusive, and everyone kind of is involved. Other forms of humor are where I'm making fun of this person, or I'm being very aggressive about this particular thing or this group of people. Well, it could be an inappropriate target. Like, oh, I have this really funny joke about Argentinians. It's like, well, no, that's an inappropriate, potentially an inappropriate target. I don't know any good jokes about Argentinians. I apologize.
We can tell some. We can tell some.
Yeah, you can tell some, right? So the inappropriate target, or it could come at an inappropriate time. So using humor effectively doesn't mean you always have to use humor, right? If you're letting go a bunch of people, if you have to lay off a bunch of people or fire a bunch of people, that's not the time to then make a joke about like, oh, because I need a bigger yacht, right? If you're a senior leader and like, that's not going to be appropriate humor, or it's not the time to like bust out a Frozen parody of like, I've got to let you go, can't come back anymore. Like, not appropriate in the workplace. It's inappropriate.
It's fun.
Time. It's fun, but it is inappropriate. And what's interesting about it, what makes this kind of difficult, certainly, is that is what is appropriate for one person might be inappropriate for another. And so really understanding your audience becomes really, really important, because Leanne and Paul, I know you all know each other pretty well. So the jokes that you make with each other after having done so many of these together and getting along pretty well is going to be very different than a joke that you might make with someone that you're meeting for the very first time. So you want to start off with...
Still not fun. It still doesn't work. I've been trying for years and it's still not fun. Sorry.
Exactly. And so, but that's great. So that's sarcastic humor. And if someone didn't know you very well and they took that at its word, they'd be like, man, Leanne is mean. Why is he so mean? It's like, no, it's a playfulness of the relationship, right? So it's important to kind of understand that. The easiest thing that I think is the way that we like the tip for using humor in the workplace, what I'll encourage is think of what we call the newspaper rule, or the rule de periodico. I know periodico is newspaper, I think. But it's basically to say, would you be comfortable with whatever humor you used showing up in the front page of your newspaper, right? Would you want everyone to read about the joke that you made, or the comment that you said, or the thing that you did? And if you're like, I don't know if I'd want my boss to see that I said that, or I don't know if I'd want my spouse to know I said that, or I wouldn't want my mom to hear me say that, then it means that it's probably not appropriate for the workplace.
I understand.
Is it harder to do humor or to use humor at work through Zoom?
It can be, especially if no one has their videos on, right? So this is a very helpful thing. Like, it's great for me to be able to see your face, and when you kind of smile or nod along, it's like, okay, that's resonating. If you're just like, what? Like, then it's going to be harder because you're like, what does that change? And so not seeing people's faces, I think, can be a little bit challenging. So one of the smallest things that you can do, particularly as a leader, but anyone in an organization, when you're joining meetings and someone is presenting, have your video on, right? It's such a small thing to be able to do to show that engagement to people of like, hey, I'm here, I'm listening, I care. And you can always make a joke. Like, I joke when we do our presentations, we encourage people to have their videos on because it creates more of a community feel. And I'll joke about it. I'll say, you know, like, I'm always a little bit skeptical of people who never turn their videos on, because I'm always wondering, like, what is that person hiding, right? Is it a bad hair day? Are they always just stuffing food into their face? Do they have like an embarrassing Backstreet Boys poster on the wall or something? Like, what is it that they're hiding? You know, so you can kind of make humor in light of it, but it can be very tough to do it virtually because it's in a vacuum, right? Because you're like, are people laughing? Are they not? The other thing that makes it a little bit harder is one of the biggest mistakes people will make when they're starting to use humor a little bit more vocally for other people is they will do what we call stepping on your laughter. So, you know, if I say something funny, or at least what I think is funny. So I'll share a pun. This may or may not work for some of you, because I don't know how the translation will work. But for example, if I say, you know, what's the key to being a good ghost is to act supernatural. I think it's a good joke. Pal, thank you for the right. I think it's a good joke. Now, if I say that joke, if I say that, but I don't, like, if I get nervous about saying that and I don't leave a long enough of a pause for you to hear the joke, process the joke, and laugh, if I start talking again right away, you're going to suppress that laughter because you want to hear what I say next. So I'm stepping on my laughter is what they call it. Or basically, I'm interrupting your laughter with me continuing to speak. And so as someone who's using humor a little bit more, you have to get comfortable with a little bit of silence to say, okay, this is where I need to give people a little bit of time to laugh. That's a little bit easier to do in person, even harder to do in Zoom because there's a longer delay. You have to wait a little bit longer. So one of the best tips, the two best tips that I've heard for giving better virtual presentations when it comes to using humor. One is to put a little smiley face sticky note next to your webcam, because this is how you make eye contact with the audience, is by looking at your webcam. It's not by looking at yourself or looking at the other audience members. It's looking at the webcam. So if you put a little sticky note with a smiley face on it, then it's kind of like, oh, it's a reminder to check in with the camera. And then the second tip is when you are presenting virtually, I think it helps to assume that you are crushing it, right? Assume that you are doing really, really well, that people are laughing. Like, I can't see Marcelo or Virginia or Karen or some of these people, but I'm assuming, similar to Leon mentioned earlier, I'm assuming that they're laughing at all of these things, that they're enjoying it,
sure.
They're nodding along, they're loving it. I mean, Marcelo's got a great headshot as part of his background with a smile anyway. So I'm just assuming that that smile is for me as I'm saying these things, right? And that's going to help you deliver better, because to assume anything else, to worry about like, but what is Adriana thinking right now? Is she liking it, not liking it? What's going on? Then that means that I'm not going to be able to deliver as well. And so assume that you're crushing it, and then later work on improvements kind of when you're in the practice mode.
Perfect. Sorry, I was so into it. I was about to speak in Spanish. Yeah, it was like, oh yeah, so good. What about before we finish? What about these 7 personas that kept like knocking on my head? All the 7. I mean, they're too much. Too many people to knock on my head. Yeah, too many people to be knocking on my head. what about these 7 personas that I could choose to drive my humor a little bit better?
Yeah, so the context for this comes from the idea that, just as we have different, personalities in terms of how we show up, we have different ways that we use humor. And I recognize this because I'm very different than the way that my brother uses humor. In fact, my brother, who's a professor at Texas A&M, also speaks on the subject of humor. I think I mentioned to you all before, he speaks Spanish, or he speaks way more Spanish than me. So maybe you can have him on in the future and do this in Spanish. But we were presenting at the same conference together, and a woman came up to us afterwards, and she's like, I find it so interesting that you two are related. Because first of all, she's like, you don't look anything alike, which is true, because people tell me I kind of look like a skinny Hugh Jackman. I don't know if that is true, but a skinny Hugh Jackman, I'll take. And
now that you mentioned, yes, little.
You can see it.
Now
yeah,
that you mentioned, yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Also, I was about to start speaking about Wolverine. Yeah,
exactly. Right, Wolverine. Yeah, I'm not super strong Hugh Jackman Wolverine, but like a skinny, frail, doesn't eat enough version of Hugh Jackman. And my brother looks kind of like a hipster Jesus, hipster like Jesus, like, yeah. He is very different. Or Fabio, if you remember Fabio, because he has long hair down to here, etc. So we look nothing alike. And then also our humor is different. So this woman was like, to my brother, she's like, your humor is very conversational. It's very warm. And then she turned to me and she's like, and your humor is more cold. And I think what she meant is like, my brother is one of those people who just the way he speaks, people find interesting, right? Like he doesn't necessarily even know that he's making people laugh. Like he doesn't know why people are laughing. He just knows that people do laugh when he speaks. Whereas I am someone who is very intentional about my humor. There's a clear kind of setup and punchline. Like I have, hey, this is a comic triple, etc. And so I got really interested in this difference. Like his style is so different than mine, which is different than my other brothers, which is different than, these other people. So we did a bunch of research and realized there's 7 personas, right? So to answer your question, the 7 personas are enthusiast, curator, inventor, entertainer, engineer, advocate, or skeptic. And so at a very high level, these personas, the enthusiast is someone who just laughs at everything, right? Someone who is very finds joy in things big and small. Doesn't have to be a joke, but they just find the joy in everyday life. And they're an absolute pleasure to be around because they make you feel positive. Like, Powell, you have a great listening face. Right? You smile, you laugh a lot. And so it's like, I feel like I'm doing well because they're smiling. So you have this great enthusiasm that is to support people, which is great. Then you have the curators, and curators are similar to enthusiasts, but in addition to finding things that make them laugh or smile, they also share it with other people. So if you're like, oh, I just saw this really funny video. I saw, Andrew Tarvin's TEDx talk. Oh, I know a friend of mine would love seeing this video. I'm going to send it to him. Or here's this funny cartoon that I came across, or this funny TikTok video. Curators are people who are like, I find this thing funny. I'm going to send it to my friends or my coworkers or family members. And that can be a great way to incorporate humor into the workplace to get started. If you're not comfortable, I don't want to say a joke myself. Well, then you can use something that is funny from someone else to make the point. You can say, hey, watch this funny video, and then this is how it relates to this project that we're working on. So that's the curator. After that, we have the inventor. And these are the people who are good at the logic stuff that I talked about. They sit down and can write, if this is true, what else is true? And inventors recognize that it's not that funny things happen to funny people. It's that funny people see the things that happen to them in a funny way, right? They can say, oh, this thing happened to me on the way to the grocery store. So how can I turn that into a story? Or, I'm a recent father. So my daughter is 3 months old. So my wife and I, we had a baby 3 months ago. And it's like, okay,
Congrats.
What is the humor in that? Thank you. Right. So you can say, what is the humor in that of well, there's humor in that I get to say we had a baby when clearly it was my wife doing all the work, right? It's like group projects from school, if you remember that. There tended to be one person who did all the work, but we all still got the same grade. Same thing, right? Or the fact that this I think is amazing. My wife is a source of great humor and joy for me. But we were watching a documentary about babies, and in it, it said, you know, sleep is really important for babies. It's really important for their memory. And so we watched that. And afterwards, my wife was like, you know what that means, don't you? And I was like, yeah, it means that if she learns something that we feel is good, we need to make sure that she takes a nap. And she's like, no, what it means is that if something happens that we don't want her to remember, we can't let her sleep. So like if we accidentally curse around her, then it's like, okay, you're not taking a nap. Or if she like stumbles into us being intimate, then it's like, okay, no sleep for a week. You're not going to remember that at all. Right. And so that's the inventor kind of coming into play, is my wife having this observation, but then me also turning it into a story that I can share with you. Right. So it's someone who can create humor from the things that happen to them or the things that people say to them. So in addition, if the inventor is about kind of the creating of this humor, then the entertainer is about how you deliver it. This is like my brother, someone who just the way that they speak is engaging. And maybe you make people laugh, but you don't necessarily know why. Or you don't pre-plan humor, but it's just more off the cuff. You just kind of think of it in the moment. That's the entertainer. From there, we have the engineer. So the engineer is where I kind of spend most of my time as a persona, because it is people who use humor to solve a problem. So again, it's not just, I want to tell this funny story because it's funny, but I want to use a story at the beginning of my TEDx talk so that I get people to pay attention and it leads to the thesis of my talk. Or I'm going to use humor. I'm going to read emails in an accent in my head so that I stay engaged in it longer. Or I'm going to watch a funny YouTube video at the end of my workday so that I relieve some stress. Right? So that's the engineer, is very intentional about it. Then you have the advocate, and the advocate is someone who creates the space for other people. So they encourage humor, they support people like the enthusiast, but they create the space for it. So they might say, hey, I know this person on my team is really good. They're a great entertainer. Maybe I should have them be the MC of the meeting so that they can kick us off with a little bit of fun because they're good at it and they'll probably enjoy it. Or I know this person is an enthusiast, so I'm going to send them a funny video just to give them an opportunity to laugh, right? So the advocate is kind of advocating for other people. And then finally, if you think that all of this is stupid, or if you're like, I don't think I'm any of these things, then you might be the skeptic. And the skeptic is someone who is unsure of the benefits of humor in the workplace, or they don't think that they can be funny, etc. And the reality is that everyone can learn it, but sometimes we have to move past that skepticism. So those are the 7 personas. And they're very intentionally personas because they're not set in stone. Because as I'm talking through them, you might have been like, oh, I'm kind of that one, or maybe I'm this one, or maybe like it's going to change depending on the context. Sometimes you might be an enthusiast, other times you might be an entertainer, or you might go to work and be a skeptic, etc. But understanding those styles, I think, starts to help you understand how can I start to bring that humor into the workplace.
I must be an entertainer because every time I speak to the team, they laugh at me. So I should be an entertainer. No matter what I say, they start laughing. I should be an entertainer for sure, 100%. It's very interesting, and I understand that we can practice each of the personas, or we can use as a situational different timing. Okay, this is the time for me to be I don't know, an entertainer, so I could say it, or should I be a curator? Okay, I can share this with a team because I think the team need it, and that's great to understand. Is there so you have some books written? Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. So this over my shoulder, this shameless plug, is a book that we had come out a little bit. So this is Humor That Works. It has been called the funniest business book I have ever read by my mom. Yep, she made the front cover with the quote there. But yeah, so this is kind of the what, why, and how of humor in the workplace. So it covers the research behind it, the need for it, the case studies of it, and it talks about 10 humor strategies anyone can learn to use, whether they're funny or not. So that's this book here. And then if people are interested in the personas, we have a completely free assessment that they can do if they go to humorthatworks.com/assessment. Then they can take that completely free assessment. I would add it to the chat, but my Zoom window apparently is frozen right now. So if you have been typing things to me in the chat, I have not seen them at all. For some reason, I cannot see my chat. It's frozen. Luckily, I don't seem to be frozen, but if you want to share that in the chat, you are welcome.
You're not frozen, actually.
That's good.
You're a little bit cold, but that, I think, because you're American.
That's my
But,
I'm writing that down.
Yep. So
okay.
humorthatworks.com/assessment. So it's 16 questions. You can probably translate them in if you need to, or use Google Chrome Auto Translate. But then that will tell you kind of what is your natural style, maybe what are you most inclined to, and that's where we'll encourage you to start, because you can learn some of the other ones. But if you are naturally a curator, start with that. If you're naturally an enthusiast, start there, and that I think is where it becomes valuable. And you can even encourage people on your team to take it, because it can be very valuable to know if so-and-so is an enthusiast, right? Here's how I help to support them, etc. But it's one way to get started. Now, again, if you're like, I don't want to do any of that, that's great, right? There's other ways to get started, but we're just trying to make it easier for people who are like, I don't know if I'm funny. You are funny. The question is just, what kind of funny are you?
So that will be a good way to start.
Yep, exactly.
Right, to find ourselves and then move forward from there.
Yep, exactly.
Drew, just to finish the interview, what do you have any experience or any information on teams or companies that apply systematically humor at work and the results on that? Do you have something that can share with us and inspire us to say, okay, other companies they went like through this path and it was good?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think you can look at, there's certain companies whose culture revolves or includes fun or humor as part of their values. So you see that with Southwest Airlines in the United States, which is something they obviously need right now, because they're having some challenges with flights and things like that. So they need a little bit of a sense of humor, but you've seen that be a big part of their culture. And almost anytime you see a video of someone that's like, here's this funny flight attendant, it's like someone at Southwest, because they create a culture where people can add that humor. Same thing with Zappos as an organization. They bring that as part of their customer service. There's an organization, if you've ever heard of Gorilla Glue, the company that makes very strong glue and stuff like that. Maybe it's more of a US manufacturing company and some in Europe, but they're consistently ranked as one of the top places to work. But that's a big part. I just recently had an interview with did an interview with the CEO, and a big part of it is one of their values, one of their most important values is to have fun and show it. Like that's a key part, is sometimes like, sometimes we put on a work face where we're like, no, I've got to be true serious. It's like, no, you as a human enjoy fun. So, bring that whole human to work. And you see, they're consistently rated. Their retention is very good, right? So especially right now in the face of, at least in the United States, a quote unquote great resignation. Like a lot of people are not coming back to work from the pandemic. They're finding new jobs, they're finding new experiences. So if you want employee engagement or retention, that's really important. We recently did some work with Accenture, a specific team within Accenture, to find, okay, we did the assessment for them, like the humor assessment for their entire team, to better understand what are the dynamics, who are the performers, who are the enthusiasts. And so we're still in the middle of that, but even from the first one, like there's already a positive response of, one, just by having the subject matter, people are like, oh, this was cool of our organization to be thinking about humor, of thinking about this as a valuable tool. I'm already starting to feel a little bit better about the place. And then two, having more confidence. So that's kind of the where it starts, is either strategies for stress management or confidence. And then over time, as we start to implement it, that's where we see better, like, oh, our cold email outreach is better, or whatever the specific thing we're working on. That's where we start to like see improvements of, it's not just here's humor across the board, but here's how humor solves, sales problems or retention or employee engagement or whatever. That's what we're working at trying to build. And one of the biggest ones that we probably have in terms of like specific before and after results is around stress management. is people feeling much more capable that they can manage all the ups and downs of the pandemic, that they don't feel overwhelmed by things, that certainly they still experience stress, but they feel better equipped to handle that stress, and their overall mood or demeanor is stronger since the workshop, and that has translations into productivity, etc. as well.
That's great. It's something great to have more tools to accept the difficult word that is coming, this VUCA word, this difficult word that we are facing, and it will stay for at least a few years in this sense. So having this kind of tools to be able to face and to take advantage in a way of this situation, and be strong and help others to be more comfortable at work. I think it's a great thing to do that, really.
And also to be more humans, right? Yep. Everybody wants to have fun. We want the weekends to come so we can have fun. So why don't we have fun the rest of the week? If
exactly.
we find a team that shared that with us, it's amazing.
That I think is a really key point, because I think there's so many people who have never had a job that they really enjoyed, that they didn't even know it was an option. That people like, oh, I thought it was a default that I had to dread Monday morning when it shows up, or that I had to only get excited when it was Friday afternoon and I didn't have to work later. That I didn't know that I could actually be like legitimate outside of work friends with people that I work with or whatever. And that's what humor can help us to do. And increasingly more and more people are talking about the importance of a growth mindset, or having psychological safety, or we got to be, more vulnerable at work, or we got to be more authentic, or bring our whole selves to work. Well, all of those none of those things are possible without humor, because humor is such a core part of what it means to be human, that if you're like, no, I'm bringing my whole self to work except for that humor piece, well, that's not your whole self, right? You laugh every day with your friends. And so how do we bring that into the workplace? And I think you're exactly right, that it's a key skill that we need, particularly now and going forward.
That's great. So Drew, thank you. I really appreciate all that you've said. I think at least myself, I captured the idea. I will encourage myself to be at least a little bit more funny that I was before. I mean, it's baby steps. Baby steps. So I will do my best. I will enjoy the team whenever they laugh at me. I think now it's a good thing that they are laughing. So I just try to change my mind.
I bet they are laughing with you.
I think they're laughing at me.
Really, as a comedian, though, as long as they're laughing, that's what's important to me. Whether it's with or at, I just want you to have a good time.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So let me check some things in Spanish, Drew. We have this all the things that we need to do on our show, and go with Rodri, and he knows how to live, and he teaches us every day how to live. And we have a game with the movies with Maria Paula that will recommend a movie just to understand what you were saying, and try to see it from another point of view and another application, just to fix this concept a little bit more, and to see a good movie and to have a good drink and a good food. That's the whole idea of.
And we have the drawings, and we have the graphic recording from Aldi.
I'm not sure about the graphic recording in English.
We do have a graphic recording. I know, I bet.
I'm excited.
You're mute. Leah, you're mute.
No, really?
No? I hadn't heard you.
Now we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
We should laugh at him.
It was impressive pantomime. It looked like
yeah, he is.
It was like my face, like
no, you weren't frozen. You were talking, but no sound were coming up.
So that was the time that I didn't make a mistake in my English. That was the only time when I speak perfectly well in English. So sorry, guys, you missed it. No, what I was saying, Pau, is that we need to think our name in English. I believe it's before
We
they
should.
kick our ass out. I believe
Kind
it's
of
a little
tricky,
bit
but
too
we
strong.
can think of it. Maybe
Okay.
Drew can help us with the name in English.
So let's go back to Spanish and let's play a little bit with the movies. So Drew, you can practice your Spanish right away.
I need to.
Bueno, Pau, volviendo al español rápidamente, cambiamos el switch. Ahora lo primero que me gustaría es, dada mi inseguridad psicológica, es que pongan algún comentario en el chat diciendo, no es que los quiera forzar, pero, che, Leandro, qué bien hablas inglés, me vendría súper bien, dada mi inseguridad psicológica. Si no lo quieren hacer, no hay ningún problema, voy a tener muchos...
Acá están poniendo impressive. Muy bien, te felicito.
Te agradezco muchísimo, nunca me lo hubiera esperado, la verdad me sorprenden estos comentarios.
Hay gente que quiere clases.
Bien, lo vamos a pensar, por una guita, todo es posible. Pau, nos metemos rápidamente en el juego de las pelis.
Dale, nos vamos a meter en las películas. La recomendación de hoy de utilizar el humor en el trabajo. Vamos a estar hablando de una película de 1998 del director Tom Shadyac. Es una clásica, pero no podía faltar. Hasta ahora no la habíamos traído a antes que nos rajen. Les vamos a recomendar que miren Patch Adams. Una historia muy linda, basada en un personaje que realmente usa el humor en el trabajo y encontró una forma en el humor de acercarse a sus pacientes, de trascender un poco más, de poder generar una empatía. Él empieza a desarrollarse en la medicina en los años 60, donde generar un vínculo con un paciente era como decir una mala palabra, algo de lo que no se hablaba, el paciente en un lugar y el médico en el otro, con la distancia suficiente como para no encariñarse, y él encuentra una diferencia en esto del humor, y no por humor faltar el respeto, sino simplemente cambiar un poco la cara de lo que está pasando. Así que una película espectacular, muy linda, por momentos un poquito larga, pero es una película muy linda. Robin Williams, un genio total, está ahí entre mi top 3 de actores, y me pareció que era un lindo momento para compartir esto de usar el humor de una manera inteligente, para poder acercarnos, para poder ser más humanos, y me parece que esta película lo tiene. Así que miren nuevamente Patch Adams, ahora con todo lo que nos explicó Drew. Incluso vamos a hacer esto de verla desde otra perspectiva y con otros ojos. Así que más que bienvenidos.
Es interesante, sí, Pau, la mirada de los colegas, de muchos de los colegas, cómo lo miran de manera despreciativa cuando usa el humor, esto de ser serio versus ser un buen profesional.
Hay un personaje que es el de Philip Seymour Hoffman, que es un compañero de él de la universidad, que le cuesta mucho entender de qué se trata esto del humor. O sea, él como que cree que por hacer humor es un profesional que no da lo suficiente, incluso hasta se le critican las notas que Hunter Adams tiene en su carrera universitaria, y este hombre se da cuenta que no estaba tan equivocado Hunter en la forma de pensar y en cómo hacía, y esa relación es muy interesante. Así que, de nuevo, la recomendación de esta semana, que vean Patch Adams.
Perfecto. Y para ver Patch Adams, joven Rodrigo Vargas, ¿por qué no nos lleva por un hermoso sabe vivir? ¿Qué bebida nos va a recomendar mientras nos reímos y lloramos con Patch Adams? Porque tiene de las dos. Tiene emociones para reír y para llorar.
Bueno, agridulce,
¿por qué no nos guía?
Agridulce,
un poquito,
diríamos, ¿no?
Sí, un poco sí. Es la vida misma.
Lado, sí. Vamos a ir con una recomendación, sería Pochoclo, para la charla que tuvimos recién con Drew y con la película también, sería Pochoclo, pero lo conseguimos en cualquier lado del Pochoclo y sería muy, muy breve. Entonces nos vamos a ir con una pastelería, para mí que en Buenos Aires, quienes están en Buenos Aires la están rompiendo. Quienes no estén en Buenos Aires y estén en cualquier parte de este mundo, la verdad que se acerquen a una pastelería que realmente esté haciendo una vinculación entre lo dulce y lo salado. Si bien acá estamos mostrando todo dulce, y esta pastelería, digamos, este lugar se conoció por todo lo dulce, realmente tiene en el fondo un horno y es especialista en hacer focaccia y ciabatta. Entonces tiene lo mejor de la influencia francesa y de lo dulce, francesa-argentina, y tiene ese estilo medio italiano para lo salado que es increíble, hace muy buenos hojaldres, así que invitarlos a combinar estas dos cosas. Quien va más por lo dulce, o que consiga un lugar que tenga mitad y mitad de cada uno, y la verdad que quienes estén en Buenos Aires conozcan este lugar porque es descollante, riquísimo.
Me gusta, me gusta. Estamos todavía, Rodrigo, esperando el canje ahí, a ver cuándo podemos empezar a, no sé, algún tipo de sorteo, algo, porque yo creo que la gente, quienes nos siguen, se merecen una docenita, algún canje, algo
Y
por ahí.
estábamos,
Rodrigo, confiemos en
antes
ustedes.
de fin de año estamos cerca, seguimos estando cerca, falta fin de año que se abran las puertas para una cata, para varias cosas, pero bueno, todavía todas las puertas no están abiertas, ni todos los
Ya lo
salones hay
dijeron por ahí,
disponibles.
estar cerca es muy bueno. Ya lo
Y
dijeron por
después,
ahí, esto lo ha dicho alguien.
algo para cerrar y con qué acompañamos esto. Lo mostramos el año pasado, quienes les guste la cerveza, a mi entender y en mi opinión muy personal, es la mejor cerveza que tiene Argentina. Quienes no les guste la cerveza, prueben esta cerveza porque es totalmente distinto y es de lo mejor que puede hacer este país. Así que quienes están en cualquier otro lugar del mundo, prueben una cerveza que vaya más por un poco la receta fuera de lo tradicional, un poquito menos amarga al paladar, un poco más, digamos, cremosa sin ser dulce. Así que vamos por ese lado.
Cerveza y factura, rara combinación, me gusta. Por ahí vamos
Película.
más con la focaccia, ¿no? Pero
Eh,
me gusta. Y Patch Adams ahí
Exacto.
para reventar todo. Me encanta esto. ¿Cómo venimos para un momento difícil, un desafío para Ojo que Piensa? Estuvo un
Ojo que
año,
piensa, me dejó un mensaje.
Ojo que Piensa nos dejó un mensaje. ¿Se
Y
puede
es el
decir al
siguiente.
aire?
Sí, por supuesto. Ella nos comparte el dibujo, nos comparte su graphic recording de la charla de Drew. Me dijo que le faltaban algunas cosas que los iba a agregar y que después nos iba a compartir el trabajo final, pero tenemos acá un teaser para poder acercarnos un poco al arte de Adri y de Ojo que Piensa, que comparte con nosotros en cada capítulo. Ahora les voy a copiar los enlaces para que la sigan y que vean sus talleres, porque está haciendo talleres hermosísimos, está haciendo unas cosas nuevas, así que les vamos a compartir toda la información para que la tengan, y si quieren podemos compartir ahí el graphic recording de
Dale.
Adri. Drew, the graphic recording will be in Spanish.
Yeah. It looks amazing, though.
We were discussing. Then we will send it to you. We were discussing that Adriana Feinstein, that is Ojo que Piensa, that is I that thinks. I'm not sure the translation is right, but let's assume
maybe.
it's right.
It's interesting to say I think.
I think.
Yeah.
I like
It's
it.
amazing.
I like
it's a great name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. It's she's going to add a little bit more details, but she had to leave before we end the show. But she tried to capture all about being more productive, reducing stress, being more engaged.
Mm-hmm.
The question in the lower left corner, you can see yourself. Yeah, that's you. It's a little bit far away from Wolverine, I might say. A little bit, but I think it represents you very well. And with a question,
capture the skin tone very well. I am that pale.
And she put your question, if you would like to do something fun or something not fun. That I think that's a very deep question that should move us to say, why not? Why shouldn't I do something more fun, 5 days a week, 8 or 9 hours per day? Why shouldn't I spend a better time at my job, instead of being bored or being with a long face all the time? The rule of the newspaper, and what can
The
be
reminder,
appropriate,
the funny face.
funny face, and the 7 personas. That's the whole idea of the program, to be a wrap up, to make a wrap up, and to give something to you and to the rest of the community, that can remember all the talk in just one page.
I love it. It looks fantastic. And what a great demonstration of invention skill, of being able to draw and write this, and the curation of a particular talk. So multiple personas coming together. It was an absolute pleasure for me to be here. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you all for hosting me. This I'm excited. This looks fantastic. And I assume that it's cool to see it in Spanish. It's very, very interesting to see it yes. ¿Les gustaría hacer algo divertido o algo no divertido? Now I'm slowly going to work on it for Spanish.
That's great. That's great. Andrew, thank you very much. I think one of the, if you want, only if you want, you're in public a little bit, but only if you want, we can have another meeting in the next year, going further into techniques, into topics, or whatever, how to implement humor at work. It's a great topic, and I think many of us really need it. I think at least my team will really appreciate that I start working on my humor. I'm sure of that.
Absolutely. And hopefully my Spanish will be a little bit better. Un poquito mejor hasta un año. I don't know if that makes sense.
You can practice a little bit. You're good in a good way, in a good path. So we can practice next year on your Spanish, on our humor, and have a fantastic show before they kick us out, or whatever we call in English. I'm not sure. En antes que nos rajen en español. Muchísimas gracias a todos por acompañarnos. Pau, por hacer esto posible. Mil gracias. Rodri, por enseñarnos a vivir y por poner esto al aire y por grabarlo y todo. Así que les agradezco enormemente. Andrew, thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you. Appreciate it.